One day, in the autumn of 1845, I accidentally lighted on a manuscript volume of verse in my sister Emily's handwriting. Of course, I was not surprised, knowing that she could and did write verse. I looked it over, and something more than surprise seized me, a deep conviction that these were not common effusions, nor at all like the poetry women generally write. I thought them condensed and terse, vigorous and genuine. To my ear they had also a peculiar music, wild, melancholy, and elevating. Charlotte Brontë on her sister Emily, from the Life of Charlotte Brontë by Elizabeth Gaskell, 1857. It was Emily Bronte's birthday the other day, and I was looking through her poetry when I came across one work that gave me pause for thought, and not for the usual reasons associated with this reclusive literary genius. Not for its brooding introspection, its gothic passion, or sense of tempestuous fate knocking at the door. This was a different Emily, and not all her poems are fraught with melancholic brooding, after all. This one in particular struck me as light in spirit, almost bucolic. The sense of wildness was there, and the sense of elevation that her sister referred to. It appears in the collection of poetry published in 1846 by the Brontë sisters, under the section Ellis Bell, which was Emily's pen name, and it is titled A Daydream. Written in the first person, as with most of her other poetry, it opens with a day outdoors. On a sunny brae alone I lay, one summer afternoon, it was the marriage time of May, with her young lover, June. The poem goes on to describe the summer weather as if the author were a guest at a wedding party. Yet all is not quite right. For all the merriment of the surrounding landscape, the trees did wave their plumy crests, the glad birds carolled clear, and I, of all the wedding guests, was only sullen there. More, she cannot say at once what ails her, why she cannot, will not share in these green festivities, this celebration of nature and sunshine. The very grey rocks looking on asked, "What do you here?" And I could utter no reply. In sooth, I did not know why I had brought a clouded eye to greet the general glow. Perceiving the glories of spring and summer will fade again with autumn and winter, she lies down on a bank of heather, together with her heart, as she puts it, and I guess falls into a meditation. So, resting on a heathy bank, I took my heart to me, and we together sadly sank into a reverie. We thought, when winter comes again, where will these bright things be? All vanished like a vision vain, an unreal mockery. The birds that now so blithely sing, through deserts frozen dry, poor spectres of the perished spring, in famished troops will fly. And why should we be glad at all? The leaf is hardly green, before a token of its fall is on the surface seen. But something happens. Lost in reverie, this daydream of the title, so she can't really be sure afterwards whether she were dreaming or not, she becomes aware of a presence, several in fact, hovering in the air about her, accompanied by music. Now, whether it were really so, I never could be sure, but as in fit of peevish woe I stretched me on the moor, 1,000,000 gleaming fires seemed kindling in the air, 1,000,000 silvery lyres resounded far and near. Methought the very breath I breathed was full of sparks divine, and all my heather couch was wreathed by that celestial shine. As if this were not enough, these beings speak to her as well. And while the wide earth echoing rung to that strange minstrelsy, the little glittering spirits sung, or seemed to sing to me, "O mortal, mortal, let them die, let time and tears destroy, that we may overflow the sky with universal joy." Now, who are these critters flying about in the air, playing on little harps, showing off their glitter? We know Emily spent a considerable amount of time in Gondal, that imaginary land she invented with Anne when they were still children. Emily and Anne, it seems, never really left Gondal. Many of the poems left by Emily depict or illustrate scenes from Gondal, but this poem is one of those that slips outside of that world. This poem comes across as a very personal one, a memory of an early summer's day, quite detached from the Gondal canon. What caught my eye was the description of these glittering spirits. While Gondal is a land full of drama, romance and intrigue, it does seem bereft of magical beings. Of course, we have little to nothing to go upon, as the original stories are lost to time. Just the notes and scraps that have survived do not appear to involve magic or the supernatural, although surely, as in Hamlet or Macbeth, they thought of adding in a ghost or two. Emily Bronte's novel Wuthering Heights is another beast entirely. It has its ghosts, it has the elements, the howling wind, the snowstorms, fierce dogs, brooding heavy atmospheres. The whole of nature has been let loose into the world, or at least into the house of Wuthering Heights. It is full of references to devils, goblins, ghouls, and here Emily blends local superstition with her own dark materials. Again, quite a different world, or cosmos, where storm meets calm, as suggested by Lord David Cecil. On the one hand, we have Wuthering Heights, the land of storm, high on the barren moorland, naked to the shock of the elements, the natural home of the Earnshaw family, fiery, untamed children of the storm. On the other hand, sheltered in the leafy valley below, stands Thrushcross Grange, the appropriate home of the children of calm, the gentle, passive, timid Lintons. Together, each group, following its own nature, in its own sphere, combines to compose a cosmic harmony. It is the destruction and re-establishment of this harmony which is the theme of the story. Lord David Cecil, Early Victorian Novelists, 1933. But back to the poem, A Daydream. This bright, luminescent window that opens onto a brilliantly sunny summer's day close on 200 years ago. It stands alone, and what stays with me is this description of these spirits or sprites. For while Emily doesn't call them fairies outright, that is what the description reminds me of, from accounts that crop up, not only in folklore of the past, but shared online in the present millennium. Accounts that describe bright lights, glittering forms, silvery music. By the way, have you heard of the fairy census? It's a database set up to collect eyewitness accounts from across the world, and is part of, or associated with, the Fairy Investigation Society. Yes, that too is a thing, complete with website, publications, and so on. The Fairy Investigation Society is not something new, though. It was first set up in 1927, faded from view during the Second World War, then perked up again post-war, only to peter out in the 1990s. In 2013 it was reborn, and as of 2015 conducted another fairy census. The first had been carried out in the 50s, collecting first-hand accounts of fairy encounters across the world. I quote from a few. Some are of particular interest owing to the description of those bright lights, the shower of sparks. Cornwall. In the winter of 1999 I was staying at a friend's. I awoke in the night. It was after midnight, around 3 a.m., and I heard what sounded like an angelic choir singing. It sounded very distant. I got up to investigate, walked around the house trying to work out where the sound was coming from, and could find no explanation. It wasn't coming from anything in the house that I could discern. It sounded like it was coming from the nearby moor. The night was very clear and still, no wind or rain. What choir would be out at that time of the morning on the moor in the cold and pitch-black dark? It was also otherworldly sounding. The singing continued on, and I went back to bed unable to come up with any earthly explanation. There are so many stone circles, cairns, and standing stones on the moor, a very ancient and sacred landscape. I didn't know about fairy music at the time. I was more into angels. I now wonder if it was the fae that I was hearing out on the moor that night. Again in Cornwall, some 10 or 12 years later, this time near Tintagel, 2 women saw golden yellow orbs and heard laughter and little bells or chimes. When asked, "What are fairies?" the reply was, "light beings connected to nature." Another account I came across I include also for its reference to the Tempest. Have you ever heard it said that reading Shakespeare's Tempest will call up the fairies? I don't think I had, but I loved the idea. This incident happened in the 1990s, while a teenager was spending the evening reading the Tempest. I very suddenly felt as though someone or something was looking over my left shoulder. I turned my head very quickly and instinctively, in time to see a burst of sparkly, twinkling lights, quite small, about the size of my hand, just behind and above my shoulder. It was sort of like the sparkles given out by a bonfire night sparkler, but the strange thing was, it was as though the firework or light was imploding rather than exploding in the normal way of things. Then there was nothing. I got the strongest sense that the fairy had been caught out and vanished just in time. I went back to reading my book. The memory is as clear to me now as it was over 20 years ago. An imploding flash of sparkling light. Could it have been some other supernatural being? It was a heck of a coincidence that I was reading a play that had a myth attached to it that says fairies appear when it's red, and the next second I see something that basically looks like Tinker Bell caught in the act of vanishing. I can't think of it as anything else but fairy-like. In Kent, in the 2010s, a man was at home gardening when he was suddenly surrounded by what appeared at first to be a swarm of bees. I was about to duck and run when I realised what was happening. I called to my son, and two of us stood transfixed as tiny, and I mean proper tiny, winged people flew about us, catching the late autumn sun. My son eventually asked, "Are they fairies, Daddy?" "I'm guessing so, son, but different from the ones of my youth." The man goes on to describe how when growing up in Ireland he often saw fairy folk and would go looking for them. His wife and daughter joined them in the garden and also witnessed these beings. Back to Cornwall in the early 2000s, and a group of people were wandering in the woodland in the morning when some of them saw gnome-like little men about 2 foot high working on clearing up foliage beneath the trees and chatting with each other. Small bright white balls of light moving above them from leaf to leaf. Grey-streaked fair hair, lined elderly faces, beards, green or red or brown long-sleeved tops with brown trousers and work boots, flat brown caps, twinkling bright eyes, blue or green or brown. And so it goes on, accounts dating back millennia and still popping up in the present millennium. As a side note, did you know Walt Disney was a member of the Fairy Investigation Society? All those glittering glowing lights for fairy godmothers and Tinker Bell take on a whole other meaning. So, was it a daydream that Emily Brontë experienced? Or was it something more otherworldly? Remember, her mother was from Cornwall, and her father was from Ireland, and her sister Charlotte held strong views on presentiments, further strengthened perhaps by the strange dreams she had, as described by her friend Ellen Nussey. Once she dreamt of a bridal party coming to the church at Haworth, and so real did it seem, and so vivid were her impressions of it, that when a marriage took place about 6 months after, she recognised everything as being the exact repetition in every detail of what had happened in her dream, the bride and bridegroom, the officiating clergyman, and even the faces of the onlookers appearing exactly the same. This remarkable dream left a deep impression of Miss Bronte's mind, and she said she should never forget it as long as she lived. Reminiscences of the late Miss Ellen Nussey by William Scruton, 1897. I am inclined to believe that Charlotte was not alone in her sensibilities. If she was psychic, there was no reason why Emily might not be as well. Let grief distract the sufferer's breast, and night obscure his way. They hasten him to endless rest and everlasting day. To these the world is like a tomb, a desert's naked shore. To us, in unimagined bloom, it brightens more and more. And, could we lift the veil, and give one brief glimpse to thine eye, thou wouldst rejoice for those that live, because they live to die. The music ceased. The noonday dream, like dream of night, withdrew, but fancy still will sometimes deem her fond creation true.